Welcome to Live Living, Transformational Living Magazine. I'm Editor Hornsteiner, and today we will be discussing living single as a Christian in a sexually charged culture. And to discuss this topic with us, we have with us Dr. Patricia Weerakoon, a Christian sexologist from Sydney, Australia. Welcome, Dr. Patricia.
It's great to be with you.
Well, Patricia, we will be discussing some myths, sexual myths regarding singles. And I have identified 5 of them. And the first one that I'd like to discuss with you is everybody is doing it.
The first thing we need to understand is that the world is full of sex myths. And this is one that teenagers are told, pre-teens are told, and singles in church are told. We need to understand that statistics tell us that for America, this is statistics done on nationwide surveys, only about 40%, 43% of never married female teens and 42% of never married male teenagers have ever had sexual intercourse. This is even once. So there's almost 60% who haven't had sexual intercourse. So that doesn't mean everybody's doing it. This is American statistics. Come to Australia. We know that 50% of year 12 students, this is about 18, 19-year-old, would say that they have ever had sexual intercourse. I want you to think about these statistics as Christians. We look at it and we think, this is teenagers saying this, unmarried. What's the percentage there? We are saying for Australia, 50% have not had sexual intercourse. If 50% have, 50% haven't. Now that is higher than there are Christians at that age group. So guess what? Non-Christians are not having sex. So Christians can live a life of purity because there's non-Christians living lives of purity. Now what about when you're past teens, you're still single, you're in church? Sadly, we are seeing an increasing number of young people in church who are saying, I can't wait, I can't control myself, I'm engaged to be married and therefore I have sex. Now, the reality here is that we need to train our young people that self-control is a gift of the Holy Spirit. You can control your feelings. You do not have to live by the world view that just because you are an adult and you can have sex, you need to have sex.
Thank you, Dr. Patricia. And that will tie us into our second myth, which is you must test the water first.
You people call it there, maybe booty buddies or something, but whatever it is, today we know that from many aspects, this try before you buy culture is harmful. Let me just talk about it in a few different ways. Firstly, it is bad for you, it is harmful for you at a health level. I'm a doctor and I'm now speaking from a doctor's point of view. You know, you can get sexually transmitted diseases even when you're wearing a condom. They don't tell you this in school. You can get genital warts, you can get herpes, you can get pubic lice. And then, you know, you can get pregnant, contraceptives fail. So it's not good for your health. And even with the decrease of teen pregnancies, we still have a considerable number, a worrying number of teenagers getting pregnant. So that's health. Secondly, speaking as a biologist, this try before you buy culture is bad for your brain, for your mind, because we know as biologists that there is a chemical in your brain. We call it oxytocin. It's the same chemical that is involved in bonding a mother and a baby. When you are sexually intimate with someone, these chemical levels rise, and so you bond with that person. It's like forming a little super glue relationship When you tear off, it is painful and you leave a part of yourself with that person. This is why rejection, breaking up, is painful. So it is bad for your mind when you do this try before you buy. Society, research tells us that cohabitation at a social level isn't working. There's Australian statistics here that tell us that couples who cohabit and then get married have lesser intimacy and actually more marital dysfunction and divorce. We even have a name, we call it the cohabitation effect. Finally, and probably for us Christians the most important, it is that it is against God's plan for his children for sexual intimacy. The Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 2 that sexual intimacy is a one flesh, naked and no shame relationship. This means that sex is an act of deep personal bodily entrustment. And this is something that only somebody who is committed to you, to your future, who wants to honor you, and that is marriage, can provide for you. So for all these reasons, just don't do this try before you buy.
Well, I don't want to, I hate to use the word devil's advocate, but I want to go ahead with this because I'm asking it also for someone who had a friend, and when they got married, she and her husband married, she found out that her husband was not able to perform sexually. So in a case like that, where someone may say you have to see if it works first, how do you handle that?
So what you're saying is that a couple stay celibate and they get married, and then the husband just can't, we don't like the word, but you used it, perform.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Firstly, we don't talk about sex as performance, because the moment you call sex performance, it's like, you know, you're on the stage, the curtains are there, the audience is waiting, the curtains open, and unless you have the best sex in the world and you have that wonderful orgasm, you're not going to get the applause. So we don't talk of sex as a performance, we talk of sex as other-oriented, pleasuring as a couple. So let's get that out of the way. The second thing is that we need to be very careful about what we tell young people about staying faithful and celibate before marriage. Because when we tell people stay celibate, stay pure, and then get married, we must be careful that we don't give them the impression that therefore marriage is going to be this raunch carnival of sex. It's not like that. Sex needs work. You need to work on good sex, which is what we talk about in our book, The Best Sex for Life. To expect everything to work perfectly, whether it be the male having a problem or the female having a problem, but to expect to work immediately is like saying, I think I'll go for enter for the Olympics, for the next Olympics, but maybe I'll just start swimming lessons today and expect that in 2 months you're going to be ready to enter the Olympics. It takes time, it needs caring for the other person to work out what is good sex for the two of you. So what happens if one person cannot function properly, perform properly, is that it could be one of many reasons. It could be a problem with some physiology, some illness, or it could be just the fear, or what we sexologists call performance anxiety. And this is what keeps sex therapists in business. So there's nothing shameful about asking for help if something like that happens.
What did you call it? The first is called other sexually oriented pleasure?
Oh, I call it other-oriented pleasuring. There's a whole series of sensuality exercises we talk about and we encourage couples to do. And that is basically forget the performance that you've got to produce an erection and put it in the vagina and have the biggest orgasm ever. Forget that and just enjoy the process of pleasuring the other. You know, it's very, what we talk about in the book is, it's look at it as a cruciform, other-oriented giving of yourself, because marriage is really about that. It's about caring for the other. It's about that sacrificial, what can I do for you? And if a couple are asking that and pleasuring them each other, then, you know, even if you don't have the biggest orgasm or the most raunchy sex, you will have a good sex life. Because, and I need to say this, we need to be very careful about not thinking that intimacy equals intercourse. You can be very sexually intimate even without intercourse.
So you think that perhaps we go into marriage with a narcissistic type of attitude and seeking, you know, pleasure for ourselves rather than focusing on pleasurizing the other individual?
You see, we go into marriage as Christians, unfortunately, taking world view of what relationships is. Because basically the world tells us that we are all that matters. I matter. It's individualistic. So I matter, and what gives me pleasure is the most important thing. Now, when you go into marriage, it's about other-focused, other-oriented, loving and living. I've been married 40 years, and look, it's not 40 years of raunchy sex. I mean, I ask married couples, what proportion of time do you actually spend making love? Like 50% of your married life, 25%? And by which time I have the whole hall just falling off the chair laughing. You know, 10%, 5%? Yes, it is not the main thing in marriage. It's important. It is an important aspect of marriage, but it is not the only aspect of marriage. And we need to remember that if we go into marriage, thinking, I am going to get what I want out of this, that is not a Christian marriage. We read Ephesians chapter 5, which clearly tells us it is about the other person. It's about caring for the other person. Another one is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. My body is yours and your body is mine. That's what a husband and wife say to each other. That is why it needs to be that naked and no shame of vulnerability and total trust.
Wow, good point. Intimacy and sexual intercourse are not the same thing. That's very important. Okay, well, I have another question, but I want to leave that for the last, at the end of the interview. The third myth: sexual restraint is not practical for Christians in today's society.
Yeah, sexual restraint. Why bother? Again, we go back to talking about what the world view on desire is. The world view on desire tells us if you want something, you should get it. So, whether it is sex or whether it is anything else, you have a right to get what you want in the world. That's what the world will tell us. Anything you want, and sexual desire is just one of those. You have rights to get whatever you want. Now, when we apply that to sex, it just means, how can I wait? I mean, I am less than human if I don't have sex. I have young people telling me that. Teenagers who say, if I don't have sex with my boyfriend, my friends tell me there is something wrong with me, that I am in some way sick. I mean, girls say, my boyfriend says, if I don't have sex with him, then I'm a lesbian, or there's something wrong with me, or he can't restrain himself. I mean, what is wrong with us? sex is a good gift and a blessing. I mean, go back to Genesis. What happened? God made man, woman. He looked at them and said, this is perfect. Now get out there, procreate and fill the world. Oh, and by the way, this process by which you're going to procreate and fill the world is going to be the best fun you ever have. Can you just imagine if God said, procreate and fill the world, but by the way, you're going to fill a form in triplicate and send it off to the Department of Baby Making, and then they're going to send you a baby. No, 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 no. Our good and gracious God said, get out there, have sex, and make babies. So sex is a gift and a blessing among many other blessings. Now, self-control is a gift of the Spirit. We are not bonobo monkeys or chimpanzees. We are created in the image of God, and we have a brain, what we call the frontal cortex, which empowers us to make choices. So, sexual restraint for Christians is not just a practical possibility, it is a requirement of holy living.
Wow, a requirement of holy living. Should we feel pressured by that, you think?
No, because as Christians made in the image of God, we are free to not live by the world's standards. I mean, why do we feel that our identity has to lie with the world? The world tells us that to have self-worth and be popular, we need to be better than or have more than everybody else, sexier, slimmer, whatever, hotter, whatever you call it, but you've got to be more. You've got to have that, what in Australia we call the shredded abs if you're a male, and the biggest boobs, or maybe the smallest boobs if you're a female. You've got to look like that pop star, like that airbrushed image. Look, the world sets standards which are unrealistic, because whatever you have, whatever you try to be, there will always be somebody out there with more and better than what you have. So God sets us free from this when he says, you, my child, are created in my image. And that is true freedom. Again, Galatians talks about that. You are free in me. You do not have to live by the world's values. So it is not legalism. It is grace that allows us to live as God leads. And therefore, sexual purity is a gift of grace because we are the loved members of the family of God.
A fourth myth. Since cyber sex, phone sex, or sexting is not real, it is okay.
Virtual sex. You know, when I was growing up, which was like with the dinosaurs, we didn't have virtual sex. I mean, maybe on the phone, but then since you had to put in the coin and dial and everybody could listen, no, you didn't do it. But today, virtual sex is very much a part of people's life. Now, is it real sex? Let's go back to the biology. Falling in love is a brain chemistry. You push up chemicals, we call it dopamine, which is a lovely chemical which goes up when you fall in love. It makes you so dopey, so it's very appropriately called dopamine. And dopamine is something as a precursor to some form of infidelity or sexual activity. For both those, yes, it is sex.
Brain sex.
Brain sex.
I've never heard of brain sex. So
learn something.
It's like you're saying that it's somewhat of a precursor to the real thing.
Most times, yes. As sexologists, we would see that people who start off by having sort of intimate email conversations or intimate phone sex or get into cyber sex, invariably then slide from there into some form of infidelity or premarital sexual intercourse or some form of physical sexual intimacy. That's what we are seeing as therapists.
Well, it must be also, this listening to you, I'm reminded of when Jesus said that if you already think it in your heart, if you see this woman, you meet that reference, he says you already have committed adultery if you begin to have those thoughts. So this brain sex, this must be a modern term then. But it makes sense if we are going according to biblical worldview and our beliefs as Christians, most definitely.
Yes, because what you're saying is Jesus said, be careful about lust. We have a brain mechanism for sex, so we feel desire. Feeling desire is not the big problem. Okay, let me just give you a quick example. Like, I'm married 40 years. Does this mean that I've never looked at another man and gone, whoa, I'd like to exchange that model for mine any day? No. Those sparks of desire happen. Now, when you dwell on it, when you build a fantasy around it, when you think, what am I going to do with this? And then maybe even if you don't get into cyber sex or don't get into sexting, when you build it up in your mind, then it turns into lust. Mm-hmm. So that is what we need to watch. It's not that spark that we need to be so guilty about, but it is when we dwell on it and build it into a lustful fantasy. That is what Jesus meant. And you know what he said? Just cut it off.
Okay, thank you. Our fifth myth, last one. Petting and oral sex are acceptable for an unmarried Christian once he or she does not cross the threshold of intercourse. And we're going to include masturbation in that as well.
Okay, well, here we have a very interesting question that we are asked very often by young people who are dating. How far is too far? Now, this is maybe the Australian way of wording it, but it means how far can I go before it becomes sinful? Do I stop just short of the panty line, or, can I just stop short of touching the genitals? How far is too far? Now, the first thing I want to say very clearly is that is the wrong question we are asking. Why is that? It is because the moment we ask the question, how far is too far, we are turning a gift of grace, which is sexuality, a gift given by God to be used in a specific context, naked, no shame, one flesh, Genesis. We are turning that into a legalistic set of laws. And we all know, as New Testament people, Christians, that we don't live by law, but by grace. So we immediately need to think, it's not about how far can I go as an unmarried Christian, but it is about looking at your partner and asking the question, going back to what we said earlier, what can I do to honor you? Okay, let me take an example. It's a dating couple. The guy looks at the girl and he says, you may be my wife in the future. You may be somebody else's wife. I want you to go to your marriage as a woman who is pure and a woman who is carrying this gift of sex unsullied to your marriage. And the woman says the same thing when she looks at the boy she's dating. I do not want you to tempt you to step over. I don't want to step over the limits with you, because I want you to go to your marriage, being able to guide and love your wife, and as Ephesians 5, to lead your wife in the best sex ever. I honor you. I want you to feel that I care for you and I love you. So that's one thing. Now again, that doesn't really help the couple, the young dating couple who say, but, what are we supposed to do or not do? Here's the biologist way I tell the young couples. The first thing is know what happens to your body when you are sexually aroused. In a man, it's kind of obvious what sexual arousal is. You get an erection, you're not excited. For a woman, it just takes a little longer to understand, especially when you're a young girl, to know that feeling in your body, in your genitals, that you're sexually aroused. However, be aware of what is happening to you. And if you are in a particular situation and you're feeling that sexual arousal, it's time to stop the activity, back off, and in Australia we say take the equivalent of a cold shower, because you are on a slippery slide of moving down towards sexual intercourse. Sometimes just a peck on the cheek can turn you on. It depends on who you are with. So there is no legalistic thus far is safe in a relationship. It is about being aware that in this particular situation, how far am I comfortable with going before I feel sexually aroused? If I'm sexually aroused, I need to back off. So there is no, this is the right point to back off. Some people, it's just holding hands, and that alone is sexually arousing. In which case you need to be careful where you are, what you're doing, and because you could just go down the path towards more intimacy.
Okay, so it is once you're aware, it's being aware of the sexual arousal. That is the beginning of sex.
Just be very aware, because there is no, yes, you can go up to the panty line, or yes, you can kiss but not tongue kiss. It is just being aware that your situation as a couple is about other honoring, caring for the other. And if you feel that the other person is getting aroused, even if you're not, the gracious and the loving thing to do is to step back, even if you're not aroused, is caring for the other.
What are your thoughts on masturbation?
Okay, firstly, let's just define masturbation. Masturbation, just by general definition, means touching yourself, generally your genitals, but some people could masturbate even by touching other parts of their body. So touching your body, generally your genitals, to bring yourself to sexual satisfaction. That's what masturbation in general definition means. However, we also talk of couple mutual masturbation, which is where a couple touch each other's genitals. But for the sake of discussion, let's talk about the solo sex masturbation, which is I stimulate my body to bring myself to an orgasm. Now, by looking at it in terms of just the biology, masturbation doesn't cause any physiological illnesses. In the old days, they used to think that it causes hairy palms, dropping of hair, arthritic knees. Now we know that these things are not related. I mean, the story has it that even in the old days, graham crackers, we're not pronouncing it properly, this is my Australian Sri Lankan accent, and even Kellogg's cornflakes were first developed to counter people masturbating because they're so bland in taste that if you ate a lot of them, you didn't get sexually aroused. But let's not go down breakfast, because nobody would look at their Kellogg's cornflakes the same way ever again if we did that. However, getting back to masturbation, you see, the problems with masturbation are a couple. Firstly, there's not, as I said, it doesn't cause any illness. The problem is that it is really difficult to masturbate without thinking sexual thoughts. Now, we discussed what Jesus said about lust. Lust is the sexual thoughts about somebody else. That is sinful, Jesus said. Now, it is hard to masturbate when you're thinking of the sunrise or the sunset, something totally neutral. For most people, masturbation is tied in with lustful thoughts. That is one problem. The second thing is that masturbation, as I said, we defined it as solo sex. It is about, I know my body, I will stimulate myself and have pleasure. I will pleasure myself. Now, we talked earlier about narcissistic, individualistic, hedonistic. We can use all these words to mean, I know my body, I can give myself pleasure. So the solo sex becomes not God's pattern, which is God's pattern is sex is for you and your partner in marriage. It's the second thing. So it is solo sex, so it can turn into a very selfish act, the solo sex, and the fact that it is most often tied in with lust. The third thing we know now as biologists and as sexologists is that people who masturbate a lot, especially, now what's a lot? Frequently masturbate, especially before marriage or even after marriage, and to add it to that, if they're masturbating to pornography, so masturbation, and especially if it is tied in with masturbation to porn, decreases sexual function. So men end up with premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, and just a lack of desire for normal sex. Finally, masturbation, being a sexual activity, can become a compulsive behavior. So it can become, I don't use the word addiction, but it can become a compulsive sexual behavior. So these are all the negative things about masturbation, individual.
I'm thinking, particularly for young single people, when their bodies are changing and they have all of these emotions going on within them, what can they do to help? I guess the thoughts would play definitely a major role in this. But what instructions would you give to young people to live a sexually pure life?
Yeah. Couple of things. One is knowledge is power, which is why we wrote the book, Teen Sex by the Book. You need to know what's happening in your body. We are now writing another book for 9 to 13-year-olds, for in-betweeners, because puberty age is dropping. So you need to know what's happening in your body and your brain. So you need to know that, because what you put into your brain during those early years is going to affect what you think and how you act sexually. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm talking to Christian young people, immerse yourself in the Word of God. Know that you are not identified. You're not, your self-worth does not lie with your sexuality, your body, how sexual you are. Your identity and your self-worth is already set as a child of God. That's important to know. And finally, just be very aware of how you deal with the sexual thoughts, which are the sexual desire, which is a gift from God. It's going to be like a volcano. Just be aware of how you deal with it. How do you deal with it? Firstly, never turn to pornography, be it on the internet, on your phone, or in magazines. Never turn to pornography. Make sure that you build strong friendships with both girls and boys, non-sexual, intimate friendships. Do things with girls and boys that are fun and exciting, so that you don't have the time to sit down and brood on these thoughts, because they will come. Desire will happen. And finally, have accountability partners. In other words, somebody like a youth minister or an uncle or an older brother with whom you can talk about the temptations. These are all very important steps in keeping yourself pure.
Where can we purchase your books, Teen Sex by the Book and Best Sex for Life?
Teen Sex by the Book is available, I believe, on Amazon and other sites. They've got them on Amazon. The Best Sex for Life has only just been published, so unfortunately it's only available right now on this what is called Christian Education Publishing, CEP website. Teen Sex by the Book is also available on iTunes, so it's available also on ebook. So we are Australia, we are still a little behind on all this, so we're getting there slowly.
Okay. Well, Dr. Patricia, I have one last question to ask you. Based on all that you've said, would you say that sex is overrated in our culture and perhaps friendship is underrated?
I definitely think so, because one of the main things that I think is that we have sexualized relationships. And we live in a sexualized culture. We live in a culture where I'm pretty sure it must be the same in America, but in Australia, kids' clothes are sexualized. Little kids' clothes are sexualized. We live in a culture where the average age of first porn exposure is 11 years. So we live in a pornified, sexualized culture. So at younger and younger ages, we hear young people talking of having a boyfriend, having a girlfriend. You know, every music video tells them that they should be sexual early. So we've lost that ability to care for someone, to love them as a friend. So we've lost the ability to be, not lost, but we have underplayed the beauty of non-sexual, intimate friendships. And we have sexualized our friendships. Now, as a sexologist and a medical doctor, I need to say this to you. You know, I've been a doctor for 40 years and a sexologist for 30, which means I've been researching and attending conferences and many other things. I've seen people die of a lack of food, a lack of nutrition, a lack of medication, of exposure. Let me tell you, there is not one documented case of death by lack of sex.
Well, thank you, Dr. Patricia. That's an excellent place for us to end this interview. And thank you once again. This is Live Living, Transformational Living Magazine. Dr. Patricia, thank you for honoring us with your presence today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Edna. It's been a pleasure.